Hello, everyone, and we're live. Welcome here.
Hi, everyone.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
All right, awesome. Let us know in the chat there where you're joining us from. Awesome. I see everyone saying good morning now. All right. Well, it is that time. So I think what I'll go ahead and do is hand it over to Sinai to kick us off today.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Welcome to our webinar, Reeling in Success with ArcGIS Enterprise Integration. My name is Sinai, and I'm a technical support specialist for the FME Flow product. And I have my two colleagues here. Do you want to introduce yourself? Maybe start with Dan?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Dan Minnie. I'm a technical support specialist here at Safe Software, and I focus primarily on the FME form side of things.
Good morning. My name is Matt Meebor. I'm also a technical support specialist, but with the FME Flow team, the server side team.
Awesome. Today we're going to talk about real-time workflows in ArcGIS Enterprise, and we'll start by laying the groundwork. What is a webhook? How does it relate to ArcGIS Enterprise and FME Flow? We'll explain some best practices and tips. We will also give 3 product demonstrations representing the 3 different kinds of webhooks you can build, and then we'll share some resources and finish up with the Q&A. But first, I'll let Elizabeth introduce the platform we're using today.
Perfect. So just a quick intro to Livestorm if this is your first time in the platform. We have the React emoji button. Share your reactions with us throughout using that. We have the questions in the chat tab. So keep letting us know where you're tuning in from today. We love to see that. And questions. We will have live Q&A at the end, so definitely drop those in as we go. And if you do have any audio or video issues throughout, you can click the help button on the bottom left for simple troubleshooting steps. Perfect. And I'll hand things back over to Sinai. And with that, we will launch our poll here.
Yeah, we wanted to start things off by hearing from you and learning a little bit more about your experience with enterprise webhooks, or maybe you've used webhooks in other contexts. Perhaps you've used them in ArcGIS Online. Let us know in the poll, and that can help guide some conversations. Feel free to ask questions at any skill level as well. We're going to start from the bottom and work our way up in complexity. There should be some useful information for everyone. And if there are any exclusively ArcGIS Online users in the audience, please keep in mind that the instructions differ for setting up webhooks between platforms. But I'd recommend tuning into our ArcGIS Online webinar that we have linked on the next slide. We've covered those webhooks before, but please do stick around for this presentation, if not just for workflow inspiration. Mechanically, things will just differ a little bit.
Looks like we've got a lot of users who haven't used webhooks in the enterprise before, which is good.
Yeah.
Be a good learning experience today.
Awesome. It looks like we have most folks in there now.
Great.
Yeah, it should be an opportunity to learn today and gain some inspiration for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, even if you haven't used them before, or you want to use webhooks from another web application, the webhook triggers will be showing off automations are still very relevant.
Exactly. Perfect. Okay, thanks everyone for participating in that. That's really good to know. Like I said, I think everyone will find something useful in this webinar. And there's the link to the webinar for the ArcGIS Online webhooks if you're curious about those. But if you're totally unfamiliar with webhooks and not even sure what we're actually talking about, please do stick around as well. The end goal for today basically is to learn how to build these automated workflows in FME that are both event-driven and responsive. So we're dealing with real-time workflows today, and webhooks enable us to do that. To begin with, we're going to introduce FME as a platform and a company. Safe Software has been in the data game for 30 years now. Our team is located across Canada, as we mentioned earlier. I'm located in Calgary, but our head offices are in Surrey, British Columbia. But the FME community is worldwide. I think that's reflected in the diversity of data challenges and solutions that can be found across our customers and partners. Just take a couple minutes on our forums and you can see that for yourself. And we've also kept up with the increasingly light speed pace of change in the data landscape. We support over 500 data formats, including all the latest and greatest acronyms. We have AI, AR, VR, IoT, you name it. And our supported integrations list is always expanding. But the ArcGIS Enterprise platform is one of our most well-established and well-supported integrations, I'd say. We have a lot of customers using Enterprise. The webhooks integration, however, is a relatively new approach compared to something like the SDE, and they offer considerable benefit. A challenge that webhooks address is the often time-consuming and error-prone task of manual data and user management in ArcGIS Enterprise, which is dealing with a lot of users, a lot of data, a lot of things going on, and a lot of different departments potentially. Maintaining all this often gets in the way of important projects or other goals that you might have. By automating some of these processes, however, we can free up time for things that we'd rather be doing. And webhooks are a great way to automate tasks that are time sensitive or request driven. So how can webhooks do this for us? We'll start with some general reasons. So real-time information flow enables us to make better decisions, reduce response time, and overall just be more efficient. We can enjoy better data quality by automating the validation, transformation, or analysis of new data. So by doing this, we no longer spend time reviewing and responding to individual errors and requests, ultimately freeing up our resources. We can automate sharing information with external stakeholders like partners and clients, the public, and similar barriers often extend between and within our teams and departments. Let's say you can instantly connect the planning department to parks or the engineers with administration. No matter the software or data type, everyone can work together more effectively because everyone has what they need. So webhooks ultimately allow us to build reactive instead of proactive workflows. In traditional workflows, we often ask the application for data. So you might already be familiar with APIs or other methods of data retrieval. And if it's time sensitive, we can only ask for this data more frequently. Webhooks eliminate that burden. They tell us the moment the data is available. This means less overhead for both sides. So we no longer have to ask, and that application on the other side no longer has to answer each time. So when an event takes place on one application, a message is pushed out about that event, and FME receives that message and responds with a workflow. There are a few key items and terms about webhooks that you should probably know that we'll be mentioning today. An event is anything that represents change on that application. So that might be activity, updates, the state. The webhook message usually contains information about that event. The URL is the destination for that webhook where it's sent to. And you should probably be a little familiar with JSON, a very common data exchange format for the web. So how do webhooks relate to ArcGIS Enterprise and FME? ArcGIS Enterprise offers 3 distinct categories of webhooks. The first is organization for monitoring user and item activity. Feature service webhooks for monitoring changes to hosted datasets. And lastly, geoprocessing webhooks that can notify upon the completion of the process in ArcGIS server. So within each category, we can monitor for many different kinds of events, and a full list is linked on this slide. These are some of the examples that you might use. FME could respond to changes in a user's role by updating their permissions. We may want to get a notification for different kinds of dataset updates, or automatically run a data validation workflow when a field crew makes an edit. And of course, synchronizations with different software and systems our organization may use. All of these represent tasks that are often done manually, subject to error, or maybe we should be doing them, but we can't find enough resources. I have a few of those. So when these events happen in Portal, ArcGIS pushes a message to FME Flow, and it's received by an automation. A webhook trigger receives that message, and in response, that automation will run any type of workflow with the content. And once that webhook data is ingested into an FME workspace, these are some of the tools that you might use for working with ArcGIS Portal data. We have a native reader and writer for working with hosted datasets, a connector for managing items, and the HTTP caller that can automate almost all other actions that you might need to perform in Enterprise. All you need is a web connection to your ArcGIS Enterprise. Note that the web connection needs to be configured for both your specific portal instance and both on FME Form and Flow. We have very detailed instructions for doing that on the slide if you don't have that set up already. And as mentioned, while working with almost any web format, you'll probably run into JSON. This is a very common data exchange format that's built like a dictionary, but don't worry if you're unfamiliar with JSON, we have an arsenal of transformers for turning this text into manageable data that can be used in your workflows. Lastly, there are some requirements for building these webhook workflows in your organization. Most likely, you've already got at least most of these in place. So you'll need a web connection for Portal. You'll need a Portal account with the correct permissions, a secure FME and Portal instance, and also just a network communication strategy, which is typically handled by your IT team. But I've linked an article on here for reference and tips. So now that we know our tool set and what we can do with it, we're going to jump into our practical examples. So in our first demo, we're going to be concerned with item management. Basically, we want to keep tabs on everything, so all our items that are being shared publicly, who's sharing them and when. The organization webhooks allow us to have this information instantly and automatically. So we're just going to start this demo now. So we'll begin with the completed workflow. In the ArcGIS Portal window to the left, a technician is going to share a feature service with the public. And to your right in the Slack channel, watch as the administrator is going to receive a notification about this activity in real time. The integration between Portal and Slack appears to be completely seamless. However, it's this FME Flow automation that made it all possible. So triggers kick off workflows in response to different kinds of events, and the webhook trigger responds to incoming messages. After an event is detected, we can perform many types of workflow actions. For example, a logging action here will record the content that's received from the webhook message. So we'll give this automation a name, and when we save it, it's going to make the webhook URL become available. There it is. Remember that URL is our webhook's final destination. We'll use it in our next steps. When this automation starts, the webhook trigger is now listening for incoming messages. We can access organizational webhooks from the ArcGIS Portal REST services, where we can create new webhooks or update existing webhooks. There's a couple key pieces to note. So we give it a name. There's also configuration settings for how to handle frequency and failures. And we also specify the event, in this case, sharing Portal items. We can copy our webhook trigger's URL and replace this payload URL so it's pointing to our new automation. And in our automation log, once we save that webhook, we should get an update indicating a successful connection. To test our webhook event, we can share another feature service in Portal. And when we share this feature service in Portal, we should now get a webhook message that details what's been shared and when. So just share another feature service. And to our right in our automation log, if I just refresh, here we have our webhook message detailing that sharing event. So now instead of just logging this message, let's do something with it. And for that, we need to use FME Form to build a workspace. So I'll go over to FME Form. This is our FME workspace that intakes the webhook message. We're going to turn it into a data feature first. We'll take that JSON and we want to parse it to give that data feature attributes. So we can pull out the information we want, like the username, when the event happened. Webhook messages from Portal often only give us the most basic information, so we're going to use that item ID in a REST API request to ArcGIS Portal in the HTTP caller. And when we receive more information about it, like the title, the link, the owner, description, we can build a descriptive message for our notification. We can use that message lastly in our Slack connector so that our notification is descriptive. And when this workspace is complete, we would publish it to FME Flow so that we can use it in our automation. So let's go back to our automation and update it to use that workspace. First, just stop it. And we'll add this workspace action downstream from the webhook trigger. And we will choose our webhook content to be ingested each time and passed into the workspace. And when the automation starts, it's once again listening for incoming messages from ArcGIS Portal. So let's share another item to confirm that our workflow works. Sharing an item with everyone should trigger another real-time notification to be sent to our Slack channel. There it is. But this time we've seen the magic behind the curtain, so we can go back to our automation log here. And in our automation log, we have a webhook message about the sharing event that was received. And then additionally, we see that a job was submitted for processing that webhook message and also delivered the notification. So yeah, in organizational webhook workflows, this real-time response allows administrators to respond by making it their best informed and timely decisions. So I'm going to pass it over to Dan now for an exploration of feature service webhooks.
Great. Thanks, Sanai. Yeah, so in the next section, we'll be taking a look at our feature service webhooks and how we can integrate those with FME. So in the following demo, we'll be taking a look at a scenario where a feature service contains public art records in the city of Vancouver. And every now and then, when new art installations are added, a city employee is responsible for adding these new records to the feature service using an ArcGIS Portal web map. To ensure a high standard of data quality, we want to enrich that data with some additional information, such as the neighborhood that the art is within, as well as a URL for the info page on that art installation. And we also want to send out an email notification, similar to what Sanai just showed with the Slack notifications, to the city art department manager who's responsible for overseeing the city's public art installations. So to do all this, we'll be using our feature service webhooks and the FME platform. So we'll hop into our demo. So to start off, we have our feature service in ArcGIS Portal, and I'm just showing our attributes so you get an idea of what we're working with here. We have our neighborhood, a couple other different things there, our URL. So the neighborhood and URL are the ones that we're going to want to enrich later on in our workflow. On our feature service, we need to make sure that we have enabled editing, and we are also enabled keeping track of changes to the data. If you don't have this configured, then you're not going to be able to use the feature service webhooks. So we'll go to our ArcGIS server admin directory next, and this is where you're going to be creating those webhooks. We'll go to our hosted folder and go to our feature service. And we'll scroll down to the bottom to our resources, and we can click on webhooks. And this is where we'll be creating those new webhooks. In this example, I've already created a webhook. As you can see here, we can click in and look at our settings that we've already set. We have 3 different change types, and I've enabled all of them here. It'll be monitoring for updates, deletes, and new records. You can see I've set the interval to 10 seconds. So that's how often a webhook message will be sent out if you're making changes. And I've also set up our webhook URL. So this connects to our automation where we've set up our webhook trigger. So if I click into our webhook trigger, you can see that our webhook URL here is the one that I copy and pasted into the webhook when I was creating it in our admin directory. So we'll just take a quick look at triggering that webhook. We'll go into our web map and we'll start an edit session and add a new point, and we'll place this on our map. And we'll just copy and paste in some values there for our attributes. And you can see we have different attributes here. Again, we're going to leave URL and neighborhood empty because later we'll be showing off how we can automatically populate those values using FME. Once we've finished our edits, we're just going to save our layer just to make sure all those changes are saved. And then we'll go back into our automation. And since we have our logger here, we can go into our automation log, and you can see we have our webhook message there, which contains that change URL, which is going to contain all that information we need to work with our webhook and understand what's changed with our feature service. So let's go into Workbench and we'll take a look at our workflow that we've created. First off, we'll be using that parameter fetcher to grab our webhook payload message. Next, we'll be using the ArcGIS portal webhook data getter. Thanks, Matt. This is a transformer he created. And this allows us to just pretty much plug and play that webhook payload, select a portal web connection, and it'll give us a response of adds, updates, and deletes. We've got different ports for those. And we'll be using some JSON transformers to extract our values. We'll be seeing if that neighborhood value is null, and if it is, then we're going to be doing an overlay to find which neighborhood our new art installation falls within. So here we're just extracting our geometry with our webhook payload. We do get our geometry along with that. We're just setting some coordinate systems just so that it matches with our local area boundaries data set. And we're just pulling this directly from the open data portal for the city of Vancouver. And if I scroll in here, you can see that we've got all our different neighborhoods. So we're pretty much just trying to find which neighborhood the new point or record falls within. So to do so, we're using that point on area overlayer, which is a great tool for doing these overlays. And then the last step here is just doing some more data enriching. We've got a couple more JSON transformers. This one I'm using the JSON extractor. You could use one of our other ones if you prefer. And then we'll be creating that URL linking to our information page for that art. So essentially this URL is just, it's the same string every time, but the value at the end changes. So we're just using our ID there to specify that URL. We're then using the null attribute mapper just to make sure that we don't have any null values. We're going to be mapping these to a new value, which is not specified. Just looks a little cleaner and is a little easier to see right away when you're looking at the data set. So to update our feature service or a layer in ArcGIS portal, we'll be using the portal writer. And if we go in here, you can see I've set it to update and to use the existing layer. So that's how we can enrich our data and update it with new information. And the last step here is just going to be sending out an email notification. You don't necessarily have to do this step, but this is just something I like to do using the report generator. You can generate some clean looking HTML, which we will then send to an automations writer. So this just allows us to grab that HTML content and use it in our email. The next step here would be to publish up our workspace to FME flow. So we'll just specify our workspace name. I've got an existing one there. We'll click yes. And then you would want to upload your connections. I've already done so I don't need to do this. And then all we need to do is use the job submitter service. So if we go back into FME Flow, we'll stop our automation, and you can see we already have our run workspace action there, as well as our email action, and we've just connected that to our webhook trigger. You can see with our webhook payload parameter, we've selected our message content coming from our webhook trigger. We've specified our portal URLs. That's our local area boundaries, GeoJSON file, and our web connection. We've then specified our email information, and you can see we're using the HTML email format, and our email body is coming from that HTML report generator. So we'll save that, and let's start our automation. And then we'll go back to our web map and add another feature. So as we're adding this feature, let's keep in mind what's happening here on the FME form side of things, or should I say FME Flow, with that workspace we published. If we leave the neighborhood and the URL values empty, as we're doing here, we should expect that FME Flow is going to be grabbing that webhook message. It's going to see that those values are empty, and it's going to process it through our workspace, find out which neighborhood our art falls within, add that URL, and then update that new record in our feature layer. So we'll just go ahead and save those edits. And then we'll be refreshing our page here. And after refreshing our page, we should see when we click on our new record that those attribute values have now been updated. So we'll click on that. And as you can see, we now see that we have the neighborhood value here, which is Mount Pleasant, and we also have a URL value populated. So it looks like our workspace worked, and we've also got our email notification, and this just tells us that a new feature has been added. And we've also got some information such as the title, what type of public art it is, and also a link to the web map just to make it easy for the city art manager to take a look at that. All right, and we'll go back to our slides here. So just to recap, with our feature service webhooks, we're able to monitor for adds, updates, and deletes on our records that are added or removed. For our feature service webhooks, we need to create these through the ArcGIS server administrator directory. So this is different than those organization webhooks. We also want to take advantage of that ArcGIS portal webhook data getter we created. This makes it super easy to process that webhook message and parse out any information you need. These webhooks can only be created by admins or members with feature layer privileges, so that's something to keep in mind. And as we showed at the beginning there, you need your editing capabilities enabled on the feature service in order to create those webhooks. All right, I'm going to pass it off to Matt to demonstrate the geoprocessing webhooks.
Awesome, thanks, Dan. Yeah, so I'm going to demonstrate the last new webhook that's in Enterprise 11, which is the geoprocessing webhook. Prior to Enterprise 11, there was just organization webhooks. So our goal with this demo is to start a downstream process when a geoprocessing service completes on ArcGIS server. And the blocker in this case might be, how do we know it's completed? How do we start that downstream process? And of course, as we've seen so far, the solution is going to be a webhook, in this case, an enterprise geoprocessing webhook and a FME flow automation to catch that webhook message. And the result will be near real-time notification whenever a geoprocessing service completes. So I'm just going to go into the demo now. Just give it a moment. So the first step we have to do in FME Flow is to create an automation. I've already got this one created, and we're going to use the webhook trigger that we've seen a few times now. After saving, I'm going to get that webhook URL. Because I had already created this automation and changed the trigger afterwards for this demo, I have to just put some temporary text in there. That's just a small issue in this particular build I was using. But there we see the webhook URL that always gets generated by the automation. And that's the webhook URL that we'll use to create our ArcGIS Enterprise Portal Geoprocessing webhook. So I'm just going to hook that up to a logger for now, nothing else, just so that we can log out that webhook payload and see what the geoprocessing message looks like. A very important step, always make sure to start the automation, otherwise you'll get an error when trying to create the webhook in ArcGIS Enterprise Portal, or I should say ArcGIS Server. Like the feature service webhooks, these webhooks are created via the ArcGIS Server Administrator directory. So I'm going to log in here. You can log in with username, password, or with a portal token. And after logging in, under services, we'll go to our list of geoprocessing services. Went to the wrong one there. Here we go. So we're just looking at system services here, ones that come with ArcGIS Server. Specifically, we'll look at the spatial analysis service. And if you scroll to the bottom of your geoprocessing service now, you'll see a link for webhooks. None created at the moment, so we'll create one. And unlike the other types of webhooks, these ones are quite simple. There's no specific events to subscribe to. It's just on or off, basically. So we're going to give it a name, paste in our webhook URL from the webhook trigger in FME flow. And another key thing to mention here is you want to make sure if you have HTTPS enabled in FME flow, which it needs to be, you might get an error when clicking create there if your ArcGIS server does not trust the SSL certificate in FME flow. So you might need to import the certificate to your ArcGIS server. But as we see everything worked, I'm just jumping back into the automation. And upon creation of that webhook, we'll see the webhook's been registered and the name of the webhook we just created in our automation log. So we know things are wired up and working. Now, I'd like to just trigger a processing service to complete. So I'm going to go into this simple city map here. It just has some basic layers of food vendors and community centers, parks and transit stations in Vancouver. And I'm just going to go into our transit stations and trigger we'll just use a simple buffer around our transit stations. You can just say perhaps 0.5 kilometer. And that's going to create a new layer, our buffer of our transit station. So we'll run this. And it's important to note with these geoprocessing webhooks that when we go to execute the service, there's no webhook fired. We have to wait for this service to complete. And that is what will trigger the webhook. Whether it completes successfully or with an error or with warnings, you'll get all that info in the message. But you don't actually get the webhook triggered until the geoprocessing service job completes. So that one's completed. We have our buffers. And so if we go back into our automation log now and refresh, we see we've received some JSON from ArcGIS server. And we're going to take another look at this JSON message in FME form, where we can format it a bit better. But I'm going to copy this whole message and go into form shortly where we can use it. I forgot to show, I'm just going to click on my logger. To get that content, you do have to log the message content from the webhook trigger. So I already had that set up on this log action. And you can find that under webhook message content. Okay, so taking a look in FME form here. Just going to bring that up. I've created this workspace ahead of time. It's going to take the JSON payload from the geoprocessing webhook that we saw in our automation log, parse it out, do a little bit of datetime conversion, and we're going to use the ArcGIS portal webhook data getter, which is available in the FME hub, passing in that whole JSON message. And we'll see that there's also a geoprocessing messages output port here. You'll see shortly the JSON payload includes a status URL that we can pass to our to our transformer to get more messages. And then we're writing out to the FME automation. So I'll paste in that JSON payload. And I'm just going to run this workspace up to the JSON flattener so we can take a look. And it'll be formatted as JSON, so it's a little easier to see. So here's what you get in a geoprocessing job webhook payload. You'll see the task that we ran is create buffers, the service name, job ID, the name of the webhook that fired it, and importantly, that status URL. So that status URL, if polled, will give us some additional messages about the geoprocessing service, especially useful if you have errors or warnings. And those are going to come out of our ArcGIS portal webhook data getter. So we'll run up to that and we'll inspect our geoprocessing messages output. Now, in this case, because everything succeeded, there's no additional messages returned. But just as an example, if there was an error, I'll just pull up a sample error here. Yeah, so none there. Everything was successful. Just looking at an error here of messages that would come back if something had failed. For example, in this case, we can't access the URL. There's also like warnings with warning numbers that may come back if there were any warnings. And now I'm going to publish this up to FME Flow. I've already published it, so that's the action we see in the automation here. So I want to connect up now my webhook trigger to the workspace action and save that. So if I click on this action, you'll see we're passing in that webhook message content from the webhook trigger to be processed by that workspace we just looked at. And we'll see there's our automation writer output port. And that's going to pass back the attributes from the workspace that we can use in an email notification that we're going to send regardless of whether the geoprocessing service fails or succeeds. So here we'll see, using the text editor, all the fields from the JSON payload, in addition to the messages we're getting from the ArcGIS portal webhook data getter. I'm going to send that all out as an email. And then I'm going to use a filter in this automation to look at that geoprocessing job status. And if it succeeded, I'm going to use a second workspace to write the new feature layer that was created out to ArcGIS Online. Of course, this could be a different database or a file, wherever you want to put that data. Here's the workspace I'm using in the second action. It's pretty simple. I'm using the ArcGIS Online connector to go get the feature service path from ArcGIS portal, because I'm going to pick a specific folder to write my layer out to. And then once I have that URL, I'll use a feature reader to go get the features. I'm going to do some schema cleanup and then write it out to ArcGIS Online. So I'll restart the automation here. And I'm going to go back into our city map, and I'm going to trigger another geoprocess. So I'll remove the buffer layer we created, and we'll go back into transit stations again. And this time we'll run a different geoprocess against that service. How about find locations? So let's build a little expression here against our other layers. We'll say we want to find locations within a distance of 250 meters of food vendors, and perhaps within that same distance of, we'll say, parks maybe. And why not? We'll add one more attribute, or one more condition, I should say, within 1 kilometer of community centers. So we're trying to find, we'll call these the prime transit stations, the ones that are well serviced with amenities. And I'm going to save this result in another folder that I'm going to pull in my FME form workspace. So I'll run this analysis. Again, just to reiterate, this doesn't trigger the webhook yet. The webhook will only be triggered once the geoprocess completes, hopefully successfully. So we're just waiting for that to complete. And now we have a new layer, prime transit stations. We'll see that there was 3 found. So we'll expect to see these same 3 points in ArcGIS Online now. because the process completed successfully. So we'll just jump over out of Enterprise Portal, and this is ArcGIS Online. I'm gonna just refresh my content here, and we see we have a new transit stations feature layer. And if we open this up in Map Viewer to take a look, we should see the same 3 points. While we're waiting for that to load, just flip back and show the layer created in Portal. And here we go. So zoom out a bit and we'll see there's the same 3 points that we saw in Portal. They're now created in ArcGIS Online as well. So that's a way you can use a geoprocessing service webhook to trigger a downstream process for synchronizing data or sending notifications. Here's the email we received saying that that job completed successfully, no additional messages, and we can even see what webhook triggered the process. It's a good idea to include that webhook, or perhaps to include your FME flow instance name in the webhooks, where the trigger's coming from. So that concludes the demo. Just a few key points to reiterate here. Using webhooks, FME can start another process whenever an ArcGIS server geoprocessing service completes. And so we looked at a really basic canned geoprocessing job, but you might have a custom one you've developed that's longer running. For example, like from a model in ArcGIS Pro. So that's really where this could be more powerful for you to integrate those existing processes with other processes downstream using FME flow. Geoprocessing webhooks are created in ArcGIS Server, not Portal. I misspoke at the start of the demo because used to creating them in Portal, because that's where organization webhooks are created, but no, they're created in ArcGIS Server administrative console. And lastly, you want to use the ArcGIS Portal webhook data getter from the FME hub to get additional messages back from the geoprocessing job. And you need to have the right privileges to create geoprocessing webhooks. You need to be an ArcGIS Server administrator, have access to the admin server console or server directory, I should say. Or you need to be in a custom role that's been granted the new create geoprocessing webhook privilege, which is new in, I believe, ArcGIS Enterprise 11.1. Okay, and now I'll pass it back to Dan for the conclusion.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, let's just conclude here before we go to some resources. So yeah, FME form and flow make it really easy to implement the ArcGIS Enterprise webhooks, whether you're looking at organization, geoprocessing, and feature service webhooks. There's multiple different ways to work with webhooks in ArcGIS Enterprise, and I highly recommend that you reference some of our documentation. We have some articles that we've created as a result of this webinar, basically step-by-step guides on how to create these different webhooks if you miss some steps during this webinar. We'll also be sharing out our workspaces from this webinar, so you'll have that to use as well as a reference. Definitely make use of that ArcGIS Portal webhook data getter. It makes it really easy to work with parsing out information from the webhook response messages and saves you a lot of time. There's also some networking and considerations and requirements that we've mentioned throughout this webinar. If you are having any issues setting up your webhooks, please reference those. We'll be sharing out some links again in the next slides, which will provide documentation on this as well. Yeah, so some different resources we have here for you to use. A couple different ones. We've got some articles we've created as a result of this webinar. That's those integrating ones there. So if you're looking for geoprocessing webhooks or feature service webhooks, we've got tutorials on those, as well as our organization webhooks article. Elizabeth, did you want to take over here?
Yeah, absolutely. So FME Academy is a great place for guided learning at your fingertips. So check that out, community.safe.com/academy. We also have an ebook on spatial data for the enterprise. So the link is there as well. Webinars, safe.com/webinars. Lots of great upcoming ones that we have, as well as lots of resources on demand. A knowledge base as well. So a link there for some how-tos and demos to further guide your learning. And as next steps here, We encourage you to contact us, info@safe.com. If you do have any questions, we'd love to chat about anything data with you. And FME Accelerator is a great place to get started unlocking the power of your data in just 90 minutes. I actually recently took this course myself and found it to be a great foundation for learning FME. Claim your community badge as a thank you for joining us. I will post that in the chat now as well, just so you have it for reference. And if you aren't yet part of our FME community, we'd encourage you to check it out. It's a great place to network with other users alike and FME experts. Awesome. And with that, I will have our presenters join me on stage and we can take a look over the questions tab together. And while I give them a moment to do that, I'll also share my screen here for our FME user conference, the Peak of Data Integration. I just wanted to quickly add a note about this as well, because we do have the call for presentation open at the moment. So encourage you to apply to present if that's of interest and you have yet to do so. Very exciting. All right, at this point, yeah, any questions that we want to get started with? I know we did have a handful come in.
Yeah, there's a good question if these workflows can be done in ArcGIS Online. The answer is yes for some of them. So specifically for the feature service webhooks, we can set those up in ArcGIS Online. We do have a separate transformer for retrieving those responses. It's the ArcGIS Online data getter instead of the ArcGIS portal webhook data getter. So just be mindful of that. Otherwise, we have some tutorials on our knowledge base that go over the steps for setting those up, albeit in an ArcGIS Online environment. So it's all possible.
Yeah,
I'm not sure what the best.
Well, sorry, you go ahead, Matt.
Oh, I was just going to say to wrap that question up. I'm not sure the best way to share links to the knowledge base, or just to maybe in the chat, Elizabeth, or.
Yeah, that works well. People can click on them right that way.
So I just put one in there for the, no problem. For that one, the one I just shared is for ArcGIS Online. It's a little more simple setting up a webhook. It doesn't involve the ArcGIS Online webhook data getter. There's another one we have that's a little longer if you have the time. It's using field maps, which is just ArcGIS Online. So I'll paste that one too if you're interested. Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I was just going to bring up some of the questions around whether or not your FME flow has to be public for Survey 123 and field maps. And I just want to make sure I got that answer right, because I don't work as much on the FME flow side, but from what I know, it has to be publicly facing. Or you'd have to be in the same network to essentially get those the communication going back and forth for those webhooks.
Yeah, that's right. For ArcGIS was the question about ArcGIS Online, sorry, or was it portal, or was it specific?
This one is for Survey 123 and field maps. So
so online,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of, we actually only found it ourselves somewhat recently. I think that Esri made some changes in Survey 123. Just as a heads up, Survey 123 webhooks actually work very, very differently. They're set up and configured quite differently than other ArcGIS Online webhooks like field maps. They're just implemented differently by Esri. So it looks like the article Dan shared goes through that process. And Survey 123 webhooks, if you're VPN'd into the same network or on the same network and submitted through the browser, they will actually go through to your FME flow instance. However, the field maps or the other ArcGIS Online webhooks won't. It's only the Survey 123 webhooks. So, but in general, for most people, most use cases, yeah, your FME flow instance needs to be publicly facing. So behind something like a reverse proxy or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's always a good idea to consult with your IT team in your organization when setting those things up. We can offer some suggestions, and I believe the article for making your FME flow publicly accessible. It was linked in that question response on the sidebar, but it varies for every organization, the approach you take. So yeah, we can help guide you to the right answer, but it might be dependent on what your security requirements are.
We just had another question come in, so I'll pull that one up. So Jacob's asking, can you use webhooks without FME flow, but by publishing the geoprocessing tool to ArcGIS server? I guess in terms of the FME side, you'll need FME flow to do the webhook kind of messaging back and forth there, since we don't have any webhook triggers or ways to work with webhooks in FME form. Any other thoughts there, guys?
Yeah, you need so on FME flow, you have essentially services that are like web services that are running on a web server that can receive those payloads, whereas data interoperability, which is like Workbench, just doesn't have those services running to receive a payload. So yeah, I think you're right. I don't think there's any way to use it with data interoperability.
I just wanted to add on to a question someone asked if they could trigger a webhook based on the size of a file that their users are uploading. You can use administrative webhooks to monitor user activities. So one of those would be uploading files, things like that, or other kind of actions performed on different items in your portal. ArcGIS itself doesn't offer those sort of filtering options as far as I'm aware, unless they've built on top of those functions. So what you can do is just create a general webhook trigger on file upload, let's say, and then use an FME workspace to build in your filtering and conditions. So you can build in your threshold inside the workspace using something like a test filter and conditional requirements, and then route your next steps and workflows based on those thresholds. So that's a real advantage of using FME with ArcGIS Webhooks, is you can really expand upon the functionality that ArcGIS offers out of the box and set your own rules and do what you want with that information. So great question.
There's, here, we'll answer this one live, try to anyways. There's a question from Kevin, can you make HTTP post requests with JSON as well as with the REST API using FME flow? You can definitely make HTTP post requests with JSON using an HTTP caller. So yes, the answer is yes. You'd publish that workspace up, if I'm understanding the question correctly, up to Flow with the HTTP caller to make those post requests. This would be similar to how you would do this in ArcGIS Online with Power Automate. These tools would then bridge the gap with ArcGIS Enterprise. I don't completely understand the second part of the question. Sorry, does it make sense to Dan or Sinai? But I know it's certainly possible in FME to make HTTP post or get or put or any kind of HTTP request.
Yeah, I co-sign what you just said. I think any kind of request that you can make through the REST API for Portal, Enterprise, or Online is possible through the HTTP caller. It's really, really flexible. You can even control the rate of requests, how often, concurrency, that everything you could dream of with REST API. So that makes FME a really good tool for administering your portal or ArcGIS Online, structuring workflows, that kind of thing, that user management. Yeah, essentially anything through ArcGIS's REST APIs that they offer, you can do from a workspace.
I just put the link to the HTTP caller documentation in the chat so folks can see all the different methods. I think it covers pretty much everything.
Perfect. Yeah, that includes working with files and attachments as well.
Yeah.
So lots of flexibility.
Yeah, and then of course, when it comes to just features and inserting or deleting or updating features, then we have our classic readers and writers for those as well. I have one more question here that came in. So what kind of permissions are required for sending an email or pushing to Teams? So I know with Teams, we have the FME Hub transformer called the Microsoft, I believe it's a Microsoft connector. I'll have to double check on that. But that's what you could use to connect to Teams and send a message through there. So as long as you have and create a web connection with an account that has access to those Teams channels that you want to post to, then you should be fine there.
Yeah, there's a Microsoft Teams connector in the FME Hub.
Yeah. And then I guess the email side would be pretty similar. If you're sending that email from FME flow or server, would there be any additional considerations there? You just have to have the account permissions on that and the credentials.
I haven't really used the Teams connector much myself. I'm just seeing I think it uses a web connection, like you said. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that, I'm assuming that's an OAuth2 web connection, so it would have to be authorized by someone with the credentials and access to the channel you want to post to, for example. So yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
A couple more minutes left, so I guess we'll live answer this one that came in. I'm working with Environment Canada's Grid2 data. I'm not familiar with that one myself, but they have a webhook for pushing when there's an update. Is that something that can be ingested by FME Flow to Enterprise? Yes, absolutely. So our webhook trigger, webhook automation trigger can be triggered by any web application as long as the two can communicate with each other. So you might need to make your FME Flow instance publicly facing, perhaps, for Environment Canada's website to push that payload down and for FME Flow to receive it. But if you've done that, then in theory, yep, you should be able to provide. I'm not, again, familiar with their webhook setup, but typically in an external vendor web app like ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Portal, like we saw, you're providing the webhook URL that gets created when you create a webhook trigger. And then so it knows where to post to, and you could receive that and use our feature writers to write up to ArcGIS Online or Enterprise. You'd probably need to parse the data. I'm assuming they send the data as JSON, so you probably need to do some JSON parsing in your workspace to get those features out and then put them into ArcGIS Online or Portal.
Yeah, I'm also unfamiliar with that data format, but a quick search, it does look like we do have the CRIB data format reader. So that might come in handy when you're working with this data if you're not already using it.
Nice find. Yeah, I haven't used that one myself.
Oh, me neither.
So yeah, it'd be interesting to see what they include in their webhook payload, because maybe it's a URL to get the CRIB file, and then you could just use the reader, like you say.
Mm-hmm.
You might not need to do much JSON parsing at all.
Exactly.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, I'll give the team just another moment to scan through. It does look like we got a few questions in the chat, so it might be good to just give that another scan. I do see a question came in about accessing the webinar recording. We'll definitely send that out to everyone in a follow-up email after the webinar, so you can always review this again. And with that, we also sent out, I think, as we mentioned earlier, the workspaces and slides, so you'll have all those resources together in that email.
I think we're good on the question side. I think we got most of those answered.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great questions. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, and we are wrapped up at just after the hour here. So I will go ahead and just give a huge thank you to everyone for joining us here today. If you do have a moment to fill out our webinar survey, we appreciate any feedback. Also, a big thank you to our presenting team as well for all your help with questions and preparing the content. Bye for now, and hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good day.
Bye.